down as 10:10. Go ahead and call the July 16th meeting to order. For any of those who are waiting, I appreciate your patience. Always technical issues make it a little bit difficult to get started. I would call upon Commissioner Blackwood to present the notice of meeting statement for us at this time.
A meeting notice announcing the time, date, and place of July 16th, 2020 Commission meeting was distributed July 15th, 2020 to appropriate media and other groups or individuals who requested notification. The announcement and agenda were posted at the Department of Disabilities and Special Needs Central Administrative Office and on the website.
So by way of welcome, all the commission members are either attending via computer or on the phone. Can we just announce who's, with the exception of Commissioner Blackwood, who is actually, in fact, present at the central offices, can we just have whoever's in room 251 go ahead and announce themselves, please?
Go ahead.
Room 251, yeah, the conference room.
Go ahead, Susan. Susan Beck, Associate
Hi.
Director of
Sorry about
Policy. Mary Poole, State Director.
Sandra Delaney.
Rufus Britt.
Pat Maley.
Audience too, right? I'm sure they want.
Yes, please. Yeah.
I know, but
Yeah,
people out here.
not next to a microphone, so I'll introduce
Gotcha.
him.
Okay,
Melissa.
thank you.
Okay, and we have Constance Holloway, and we have Chris Clark, and Debbie Wilson, and Joyce Kimmery.
Okay. As always, as much as possible, for those of us who are listening in via the computer, try to keep your microphones muted until such time as you're speaking to avoid background noise. I'd also ask those in the conference room just to make sure that you understand that if y'all are chatting in the background, it does get picked up by the microphone by those of us who are listening. So let's try to keep the background chatter to a minimum as well, just to avoid the disruption. Next item would be the adoption of the agenda as proposed. Does anybody have any changes, modifications, or additions to the agenda as proposed?
Let me ask, Chairman, this is David. Let me ask, we've gotten so much on the, the COVID issue, particularly one of the centers, the Witten Center. Is that going to play a role somewhere on the agenda that we can get fresh updates on that?
Yes, my understanding is that will be included in the state director's report. Is that correct, Mary?
Yes, sir, it is.
Okay.
Well, we typically haven't asked a lot of questions on the report. I want to be able to make sure that I'm clear, given Channel 7, I don't know who else, and their investigative report of the Witten Center, I think, went out to all of us, so we have that available, and I'm presuming everybody has seen that, and I was unable to pull up Mary Poole, our director, had a response, and I tried to read it on my Android, but I couldn't get that to pull up, and I think that might be, Mary, are you planning on kind of reading that also so that we can get a full picture?
Yes, sir. Not only that, we plan on doing this in a team method so that we'll give you an in-depth review. And we also have Randy Davis, the director of Witten Center, online to answer any questions you may have.
Now, will that be then, Gary, at the end? So you're saying that part of her report will be the Witten Center and all the activity and the number of cases and what is being done there at
Correct.
the end?
Yeah, I would expect Mary to make that full presentation at that time. And certainly we can open up to questions from the commission following that report.
Considering that we had so much policy committee meeting information on here, I wanted to get all through that stuff so we can give this the time it deserves.
Any additional questions, David, about that?
No,
Thank you.
sorry. No, that's great. Thank you.
Okay. Any additional questions or additions or changes to the agenda as proposed? Hearing none, would entertain a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
We have a move from Commissioner Malphurs. Do we have a second?
Second. David.
Commissioner Ross.
Commissioner Thomas first. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, the agenda is adopted unanimously. Next, we'll call upon Commissioner Miller for the invocation.
Our Father in heaven, we come now to take care of the business of the state of South Carolina as it relates to disabilities and special needs. We ask now for your guidance. Help us, direct us, and keep us in your care. Protect those that are now in harm's way as it relates to COVID-19, and help us as a commission to do the will of the state of South Carolina and your will. In Jesus' name we pray, I pray, man, pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda would be the approval of the minutes from the June 18th commission meeting and the July 9th special meeting. Those are provided to everyone. Does anyone have any additions, modifications, or changes to the minutes as proposed? Hearing none, would entertain a motion to approve the minutes from both those meetings.
So moved.
Commissioner Blackwood, do we have a second?
Second.
Commissioner Thomas. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, those minutes are approved unanimously. Next item on the agenda is Commissioner's Update. I'm going to call upon Commissioner Blackwood first because she's in the room, and then I'm just going to go down the listing. Any updates, Commissioner Blackwood?
No updates today.
Commissioner Rawlinson?
None at this time.
Commissioner Malphurs?
I have enough to say today. I'll leave that off.
Commissioner Miller? Any updates, Ed?
Oh, I'm sorry, nothing. Nothing to report.
Commissioner Thomas?
Nothing, thank you.
Thank you. I have nothing as well. The next on my agenda is public input. For those who are watching, we have put a system in place for these remote meetings that we've been doing, as long as we're operating under the COVID protocols, for public input requests to come in. That we did not have anyone seek that today. I'm not that surprised since we put that in relatively recently. But just for those in the public, there is now a mechanism in place, and just contact staff. Is that up on the website already, Mary? The information
Yes,
on that?
sir, it is.
Okay.
It's actually the same form they filled out in the lobby. It's in electronic format.
So that is available, and the mechanism for requesting that in advance so that we can have public input begin again is now in place. So obviously would urge anyone who has interest in doing that to please go to the website and look that up. Next item on the agenda is the commission committee business. First, we'll call upon Commissioner Blackwood to give us an update from the Finance Committee.
The Finance Committee met on July the 10th, and we discussed a variety of issues, none of which needed to be brought to the Commission today to vote on, but we did specifically talk about the State Master Lease Program that assists with funding our capital projects that are projected to be around $50 million over the next 5 years. The Commission will need to take action on that in the future, but we kind of got a preview of the program and the details behind it, and so that we could be, better prepared for talking and voting about it on the Commission in the future. We also, there'll also be some directives coming from the Policy Committee that our committee, the Audit Committee, will need to review and then vote on, and then bring ultimately to the Commission. And then we talked about the Internal Audit Charter and Directive, which will also be something we'll have to act on in the future for the Commission. And a Band B and I fee for service proposal was also discussed. And again, as it gets worked out and finalized, it'll be something the commission will need to vote on in the future. But that is my report from the audit committee meeting from July the 10th, which is also online, recording of that meeting if anyone wants to watch that. So that's all I have.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions regarding the Finance Committee update? Okay. Hearing none, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the Policy Committee. Would call upon Commissioner Malfris to give us an update about what the Policy Committee's been working on.
Thank you, sir. First, I'd like to say thank you for the opportunity to be chairman of the Policy Committee, and second, thank you for the opportunity again once more to be vice chairman of the board. The first item on the agenda for the Policy Committee, it's quite a few, so I apologize for that, except that I don't apologize for the fact that we're working. I do apologize for the fact that it'll take a minute, or a little bit more than a minute probably. But the first item is 800-01 CP, which is the DDSN ends policy, for lack of a better term. Not sure what we should call it other than that, but for lack of a better term, that's what we call it. So, but it exists for the success of the consumers by coordinating person-centered services and programs for persons with intellectual disability and related disabilities such as autism and head injuries and spinal cord injuries. The committee reviewed that document and have changed a couple things in it, as everybody can see, primarily about customer and not changing that to client, but changing it to, we thought about changing to client, but decided to change it to more like the way it's to person, the way it's done in other states. Another thing that we did on that one was that we changed the word success on that document to replace with what's called reaching full potential, which some of us thought was which we thought was a better way to put it, because I think success is a very vague term, and reaching full potential for those with disabilities is a much better term, because disabilities are a very customized thing, and potential is also a very customized thing. So, because one person's potential is much different than another. So, but the other thing, the other thing I want to mention is that, and the biggest thing on it probably is to say that an item that we put on there was that no commission policy, department directive, procedure, or regulation shall be interpreted to limit the commissioner's rights as a citizen, and we added or limit in any way their authority given by the governor or the commission, which I thought was a very important thing to put in that policy. At some point in the future, we'll be looking at our bylaws, and we'll probably insert it there as well. But that's not as, the bylaws are not as much a priority as all the rest of this stuff. So, because there's nothing really bad about them right now. But anyway, or I don't think, but anyway, so we need a motion to, I would guess we would do this individually, Gary, is that correct?
That's correct. We could treat each one coming out of committee, if they were voted on by the committee, as both a motion and a second, is how we've always done stuff in that manner. So it would be a motion on behalf of the policy committee. Right.
Well, then I would think I'd make a motion on behalf of the policy committee to accept the revisions of that policy.
Okay. Anyone have any questions regarding this particular policy or the recommendation?
I move the second to approve it.
And just so you know, Stephanie, from how we've always treated it, if the policy committee or the committee chair is making the representation, since we've already had the vote within the committee, we've always treated that as not needing a second, just so you know. So that's why I didn't call for one.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, hearing none, all in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any,
Aye.
any opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none, then that policy is approved unanimously. Barry, calling you to do the next one.
The next item is policy number 800-03 CP. It's the DDSN's executive limitations policy, which is basically the executive director's policy, who obviously serves, I think everybody knows, at the pleasure of the commission. And there's only a couple of real changes we asked to make on that one. But primarily what the reason we went through it and did what we did was because we wanted to combine it with two other policies to make it all one policy again. For some reason it was broken out some months ago, well, a year or so ago, and we made it back into one policy again. So there's two policies going to be obsolete now, and this is going to be the policy for that. We were an insertion of a previous commission direction to receive a quarterly report. That's one thing we're putting in there, is the fact that the commission wants to see a quarterly report for all of the contract amendments that are even under 200,000. If they're over 200,000, we vote on them anyway. But if they're under 200, we're gonna see them in a quarterly report, just so we have an idea of what of how we're moving. We realize it's about moving money around, but we want to see how we're moving money around. So that's where it is there. And then the only other thing was two other things, but one other thing was to clear. We added in there that we would try to eliminate acronyms as much as possible whenever the executive director was speaking, not only for the benefit of the commission, but primarily for the benefit of the public, so that we have less acronyms and just spell it out so that people will know. And particularly on the minutes, that needs to be done too, for permanent record purposes, I think. The next thing is that we had under the internal audit director, we had considered inserting that. As a matter of fact, we voted to insert a that since that person directly reports to the commission, then they should be basically able to be hired and fired by the commission, but also by the executive director. But we actually figured out that since then that we probably don't have the authority to do that, so it's left like it is now. But it really is sort of a moot point, because as a practical matter, the policy does say that the executive director does have to give us does have to ask permission from us in order to hire or fire that person. So it was probably a moot point anyway. The next thing on it has to do with existing or approving legislative changes. They're not done without the policy. The legislative committees, without her allowing the legislative committee's input. And I'm paraphrasing, please, but I'm trying to go as quickly as I can, because it's all in your packet and all in the information that we've provided. And the last thing was that we were going to. Currently, it says that if we have to make a policy, if the executive director has to make a policy before we can get to the next meeting, so an emergency policy, which is very unlikely, but it has happened in the past, or an emergency directive or something, then now it's going to say that she will try to contact all of the commission rather than just the chairman or the officers, which is what it says now. So that was just another small change that we made, I thought. Because like, as I say, it's very unlikely to be used anyway. But she will email us and then we'll vote that way if that becomes necessary, unless we need to talk on the phone, which we could certainly do. Which I would encourage if it was some emergency thing. But anyway, that's the revisions of that policy, and I have so many, I'll move on. So that would come out of the committee as a motion to accept those changes to that policy.
Okay. Any questions with regard to the executive limitations policy? I actually have one. On the changes to paragraph 14, which, while I agree with what's there, I feel like that's a sentence fragment. Present to the commission for review and approval any recommendations for changes to existing law or proposed legislation prior to taking any actions to initiate changes. That initiate, we have a, I think that might be a dangling participle. To initiate what? So I think grammatically,
we probably should say initiate any change, right?
I think that's what that's what it's intended, but the English, the English, not major, but the English teacher in me.
Diagramming again, okay.
Yeah, right.
Okay, that makes sense.
Very good. It is important these things are correct and not not ambiguous. That's a very
Right.
big deal to me. So that's very good.
Right. So I would propose to initiate changes would probably be the word to insert there.
Okay, I don't think
Or actions. Yeah, I think changes.
changes probably. I have no problem with that, and I don't think the rest of the committee does, do we?
Nope.
I bet you.
All right.
Okay, so changed.
Any additional questions from anyone? Hearing none, then as amended, all in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none, then those modifications are approved unanimously. All right, Barry, moving on.
The next one is the DDSN commission staff linkage policy. It's 800-04 CP. And what we primarily did there was to insert from the executive director limitations policy and the ends policy, and a discussion was held eliminating this policy because of this is another one where we eliminated 1 into 2 in order to make it read better and be better. I actually love the idea of making policies 2 into 1 so that we have a little bit less policies, because I think I may have mentioned this to some people before, but I had all these policies printed because I like to read from paper, and I actually have 3 binders, full binders, huge binders of information. So it's nice to whenever we can to mark. We're requesting that this one will be its policy and the ends policy.
Gary, can you say that last part again?
Yeah, you cut out, Barry.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say that. I'm saying I didn't mean to say we're marking it obsolete. I meant to say that that some lines have been marked obsolete. I'm sorry.
Actually, the recommendation was to eliminate this policy because we've basically cannibalized it into the other 2 policies. So that was the recommendation, is to not revise this further. It was to, from committee, it was to mark this obsolete. So it would be eliminated and taken off the books, if that's what the commission would like to do with it.
Okay. Any questions about the
I'm
proposal.
sorry, that is correct. She is correct. I'm sorry, I was wrong. I didn't look at this properly, but that is what we decided to do. And we had no problem with it in the committee.
Thank you, Barry. So we'll treat that as a motion and a second coming out of committee to essentially render this one obsolete and moot. Any questions regarding that proposal?
Let me just say, if there is any question, you might need to ask Susan because I messed that up. But anyway,
You had a
I
lot to
apologize
do.
for that.
You're doing great so far. It's a ton of detail.
We're also not used to retiring.
I know, it feels weird.
Through so many.
Anyway, okay. Anyway, sorry, but I was kind of joking. But anyway, is there any other questions?
All right, hearing none. All in favor of rendering this particular policy obsolete, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none, that motion to render obsolete is approved. Next item, Barry.
Because we're on tape, I think I hope nobody does disapprove. I'm thrilled that we're moving this quickly and that things are not being disapproved. But if you do, you need to really speak out on that because we're being taped. But the next item on and we're trying to do this by computer. But the next item is the video recording policy of meetings, and it's 800-06 CP. And of course, the purpose of this policy is literally what it says, which is a policy on videoing the commission meetings. It's a very good name for that policy. This is what we decided to do, what we were considering doing with this policy is, as recommended changes, was the title is going to be called meeting record. In the title it's going to say meeting record retention because we're putting in there a little bit about the minutes as well. Because the video we decided would be kept for 7 years, but only on the website for 2 years. Right. Previously, the policy said 3 years, and we wanted to move that to 7 because we wanted to make it agree with the minutes of our meetings, and the minutes will stay on the website. It says until for the entire 7 years, but we thought 2 years of videos was enough, clearly enough, and we were really trying to make things more agreeable with both of those things, and to clarify a little bit of other language in it, which was to clarify the language that and this is very important, to clarify the language that the minutes are the final record of the commission and not the video recording policy. And also, to some of us was a very important thing was to say that we do not need to video a meeting in order to make it an official meeting. I don't want anybody to ever think that we couldn't have a meeting just by keeping minutes, because that is officially the proper way to do it. Although we video out of basically out of courtesy again, sort of, and out of. I'm just saying that we certainly could have a meeting without it. So we wanted to put that in there to make that crystal clear to whoever would be interested in that. And then that was pretty much all of that policy. And so it comes out of the committee as a motion to make those changes to that policy.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions regarding that particular policy and its changes? All right. Hearing none, all in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none, that is passed unanimously. And in line with what Barry was saying, I'm not going and calling on each individual. Again, if anybody wants an individual vote, please just let me know that as part of the process. But I feel that by calling for ayes, nays, and abstentions, I think we're covering everything. So should have a good record. So that policy passes unanimously.
The next item on the agenda does not have a number because it's a public input document, really. It is not a policy as of now. But it is the public input document that we officially use, that people sign in whenever they do have official, whenever they do want to speak to the commission. And there was some discussion regarding that policy. I mean, that, I guess you'd call it document is a better way to put it. And the commission decided, really based upon what we did what we voted on in January, just to make that crystal clear, regarding this situation. The first thing is to say that that the commission discussed the public policy input and the meetings, and it was not required, and that the commission is not required to allow anybody to speak at any point. We do it only as a courtesy, which I think is a lot. There was and is still a lot of misconception about that, and we're trying to clear that up. It is clear we don't have any obligation, either legally or otherwise, to allow anybody to address the commission unless we decide to, and also that at any point the chairman can stop somebody even in the middle of a sentence if they're in any way, if for any reason we don't want to hear from that person anymore, for any reason whatsoever. So that's the main part of the language there. There's another one. The other thing was that regarding subcommittees, we made it to where it continues to be in writing, just like it was before. Only written comments are accepted from subcommittees, and the primary reason for that is that we really don't make decisions in subcommittees anyway. It really is brought right now and here, and so that's really the only real appropriate place. I mean, to me, the most appropriate place for somebody to bring their comments anyway. And the other big thing about this policy I wanted to mention, or this document I want to mention, is that at the August policy committee meeting, we are planning to make this into a policy officially. Not the exact sheet, of course, but the wording in it, and maybe a word or two here and there otherwise. But we're going to go back through that and make sure that that's, go back through that and make sure that it's what we want to say, and it's an official policy on public comment, which I am very thankful to see. So we would ask that we would approve this document change now, so that at the next meeting, if we have public comment, people will be able to see what it says. And I would encourage anybody to look at the website to see what it says, or to ask and ask staff to ask any questions you have about it. It's only a one-page document, so it's really not hard to read. So is there any, that comes out of committee as a motion to change that document.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody have any questions, comments regarding the input process document? I have one. The language, and I just to clarify, was there any change where at the very bottom where it says pursuant to the procedure adopted by the commission, individuals with legal action pending against SCDDSN may not speak? Was that language on the form previously?
Yes.
Yes, it was. I didn't get, I don't know what that, we didn't know, I'm not sure what that policy said, to be honest. I mean, I'm not sure. We didn't look at that sheet. We will look at it when we make that a policy.
Okay. Yeah. And maybe to clarify, there really wasn't a policy. There was some minutes where we said we were going to adapt it, and it just sort of a system developed. I think probably to clarify that as going forward, I think has been interpreted more, at least by myself and other chair, that it's been more directed towards lawyers with legal actions pending as opposed to individuals, family members. I don't know of any situation where we've had family members, but given the fact that we have certain class action, essentially things where we may have a lot of people I don't want to exclude somebody on that. That's something maybe to take up for the policy to look and see specifically maybe what the recommendation is with regarding to exactly what individuals' legal actions pending actually means. That would be my only question. That's a little bit
Right. Well, this is
vague.
still just a procedure. It is, it's not a policy,
Right.
right? It's
Yeah.
more of a
Today
practice.
we're just doing it as a procedure. We'll look into that as a policy and look at where that, and see if we need to define that or even take it off, except to say that lawyers cannot, although the key thing to it, we could say lawyers that cannot speak that have anything to do with it. And also we could say that, it does say now that we can reject anybody at any time. And so if we decide we don't want to hear from them, we can reject them at any time. We have no legal or otherwise obligation to allow anybody to speak.
Right. And I can tell you, as chair, any guidance on that is very, very welcome on my part. So I appreciate you guys looking at that and look forward to seeing the actual policy that you guys are planning on working on.
Thank you.
Could I ask one quick question?
Absolutely.
You prompted a thought, Gary. So suppose, and I don't know of such a case, but suppose there were an attorney who wanted to speak on issue X, even though she or he had a case on issue Y, and issue X had nothing to do with issue Y, that the lawsuit was over. Under the terminology, and I don't have it, it's in my tabs, and I'm not going to the tab. I'm afraid I'll mess up my screen. Would that lawyer, or even a representative, or family member, would that lawyer be barred from speaking because there was the lawsuit Y was going on?
No, that's not my understanding at all. If it had nothing to do with it, it wouldn't be, and it would be the decision of the chair to decide that anyway.
Okay.
Yeah, I will tell you, Dave, that's the answer has been, at least as far as I've applied it in those couple of cases, and when I've seen other chairs do it, it's sort of an ad hoc basis. I think it could be interpreted to be exactly that point, where if you're acting in opposition, regardless of the subject matter, that you're not allowed to come because of the conflict of interest associated with that to address other matters. That is one thing that I think would be great to be clarified in a policy, because it has been very ad hoc at the discretion of the chair, in my experience, including when I've been doing it.
All right, thank you.
We'll look at that closely whenever we make a policy, because I'm always interested in keeping things as unambiguous as possible.
Yeah.
And I hope and pray the rest of us will do the same, or the majority will do the same. So anyway, could we entertain I guess it'd be a motion, even though it's a document, but can we entertain a motion to change this document particularly for the next meeting, so that anybody that does come will see this document before?
We will treat that coming out of the committee as a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of approving this document as proposed, procedure as opposed, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed?
I think I heard everybody.
Any abstentions? Hearing none, that document and procedure is approved unanimously. Next item.
The next item on the agenda is several items, which were deferred to staff for one reason or another, and so I'm thinking it's probably best for me, and since we're probably also tired of hearing me talk anyway, that I refer this to Susan Beck and let her take us from here. Most of these things are minor changes that they're making, and if I need to state the numbers for the record, I will, or she can, I guess. But anyway, go ahead, Susan. I assume you're ready to take over for me.
I am ready. We do have one additional element there from our committee meeting this week that Commissioner Melfors, I think you intended to cover, unless you're delegating that to me.
I just remembered it. I'm sorry.
Would you like to take it back?
Well, wait a minute. I thought I did mention it. What are you
This is
speaking
the
of? I'm sorry.
new, we're recommending drafting of a new commission policy regarding commission committee procedures.
Yes. I'll take it back, please. I'm sorry about you. I'm sorry I missed that. I missed that one. I missed it on the sheet for some reason. I have a wonderful sheet here that is helping me out, but I missed it. But there's no voting on this policy right now. We are just it's in draft form, and we are considering making some. We're basically putting down the definitions of the committees and what they are to do, and we're asking the chairmen of the committees to put their input in on that, and we'll hopefully have a document for approval next month on this matter. But we need to get each committee chairman's input on what that policy should say, and we also need to go back through the policy committee's part of that and make sure that it's what we want it to be. But it's a very good new policy because it's going to spell out. It's a very good idea, Gary, to spell out exactly what our responsibilities are, and what the committee's responsibilities are, and what and meetings and all that sort of thing, and agendas, and of course the times and the number of times we meet would be determined by the chairman of those committees, and the agenda would be determined by the chairman of those committees. But we really didn't have anything that I didn't realize we really didn't have anything that defined all those, and so we're trying to do that. And we could of course add one at any time if we wanted to, but as of now it's the 3 committees that we have now. So
Okay. Yeah, look forward to seeing that. Appreciate the policy committee taking that up, and would ask all of the committee chairs and everyone who's serving on the committee, since we all do, to please give your input to Barry and if possible attend the meeting where that's being discussed so that we can hammer that. I think that's an excellent idea to have more guidance on how those are being done, since we've been making the committees a more active part of the governance that we do. Anything further on that particular item? There's no vote on that at this time, correct?
correct.
Okay.
There's
Any
no
additional questions or comments with regard to that? All right. Hearing none, would
Good, I
then
must have did all right, Susan, then.
Back to you.
Back to me.
So yeah, we'll go then.
Now we'll give it back to Susan so that Barry can be quiet.
There we go. Recognize
At least for now. It's very hard for him to stay quiet, but he'll try.
Okay, well, let's see how this goes. So delegated to staff were the following directives that we've reviewed. They've been through external review, and it's the policy procedure to now have staff bring them to the full commission meeting for approval. So you've received in your commission meeting materials a marked up version, and then right behind that a final version. And we apologize for the bulk, but that's sort of the state of how this process works, is we want to be clear about what we're revising because it's coming from staff, and then also show you that final markup. I hope that format works okay with all of you. The first directive that was is going to be presented now for your approval is 100-04, which focuses on use of adaptive behavior scales. And so the language was updated to reflect the current tools because, as you know, standardized tests get revised and republished. So we wanted to make sure that it reflected the current versions. And then also some time ago, the onset age for intellectual disability was established to be before age 22. So that correction needed to be made in this document as well. So again, the external review period passed for this. These revisions are presented for your approval today.
That should come as a motion out of the policy committee. So I'll make a motion out of the policy committee.
Okay. Any questions, discussions regarding the adaptive behavior scales policy. I've got one, and this is a particular question. I don't necessarily even know that's a policy question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So the requirement that there has to be onset before age 22, that doesn't mean that the diagnosis has to take place before they're on 22, but that the behavior, the deficit, has to occur before the age of 22, right? Because the concept that somebody could have been kept at home or in a very rural situation where they didn't get a formal medical diagnosis, and then a parent passes away and the person's in their 30s and suddenly is injected into the system, didn't formally get that wouldn't prevent them from being eligible for our services, because the disability onset was what's relevant, not the diagnosis, right?
Right. It's really looking for the deficits in intellectual and adaptive behavior, which are part of how you make a diagnosis. And those deficits must have occurred before age 22, because that's how development and the sort of developmental disability is defined.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure about that. I'd run into a situation with that before. Okay.
It's also interesting to me that it says 22 and not 21, but anyway. I don't know. I guess it really doesn't matter.
Is that just where we've under the field has just advanced it to 22? Where did that change come from? That's more for Susan, I guess.
You get your whole 21st year.
Yes.
Gotcha.
It's consistent also with some of the transition programs that are available in high schools. I mean, I'm sure there's a litany of other reasons why it's that age, but I'm kind of collecting in my mind some different reasons. You know, they're really trying to define development. So the developmental period would be when childhood ended or adolescence ended. So we're really kind of expanding, you know, beyond what a minor is. It's really not about that. It's more about development and that developmental period. So it's a very generous age from a psychologist perspective, I would say, but that is, you know, the standard, and it's consistent with how other states do it as well.
Yeah, I like that. I think it's very appropriate. Okay. Any other questions beyond my very esoteric one? All right, hearing none. All in favor of approving the revisions to the adaptive behavior scales policy, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none, those changes are adopted. Next item on the agenda.
Okay, our next item is 100-07, which is entitled Naming of Facilities, Building Dedications, and Groundbreakings. So this is an established directive that was due for review. And really the only changes we made were grammatical and just clarifying, just so it was better written. The external review period had ended, and so just in summary, it really outlines that no facility, building, or portion thereof should be named to honor any individual, either living or deceased, without DDSN Commission's prior approval. So it just establishes some structure as to how naming of buildings would occur. So we're recommending this revision for approval today.
All right. Any questions? Yes.
So that would come as I guess technically I should say that would come as a motion from the policy committee.
Yes, Mary. Sorry, I apologize about that. So any questions regarding that particular motion coming out of committee? Hearing none, all in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed?
Aye.
Any abstentions? Hearing none, that policy is approved unanimously. Next item on the agenda, Susan.
So the next one is 100-02, Preventing and Responding to Suicidal Behavior. As you can see, along with commission policies and directives, we're trying to make sure that the titling is more accurate. So we've done a revision there. As well as just kind of streamlining the document. Obviously, suicidal behavior is very important to have a lot of awareness of, so we've included some details in there. And the major revision, if we kind of step back and look at, why and what, it establishes minimum requirements for provider policies on preventing and responding to suicidal behavior, but then it allows for the local provider to then take these minimum requirements, apply them to how they're doing things there so that it fits and is customized to their individual settings. So we are recommending this revision for approval today. The external review period has also expired for this directive.
Okay, well, we would like to make a motion through the policy committee for this changes to be made.
All right, thank you. Any questions, comments regarding this particular policy? All right, hearing none, all in favor of approving the changes as proposed, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Those changes are then approved unanimously. Next item, Susan.
Okay, 50801 refers to establishing guidelines for performing competency to stand trial evaluations. So revisions to this directive, which by the way have already been out for external review, just focus on updating language to better reflect current practices. So it outlines evaluation guidelines, reporting retention timelines. That is one revision there. All information related to these evaluations are maintained for a period of 10 years. That was really the only major insertion in this revision. This is an existing directive. So we're recommending this version of revision for approval at this time.
Okay, that should come as a motion from the policy committee to make these changes. And a second.
Sorry, I got muted there. I got disconnected there I apologize for a second. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
And Barry, I came in on the end, was that the committee was making a recommendation to approve those changes?
Yes. Yes, I'm sorry.
Does anybody have any questions, comments about the policy as proposed? Just kind of curious. I know that there was a directive recently from the Supreme Court that indicated that not just the circuit court, but now magistrate courts can order evaluations. And I noticed that we took out the family court language. Have you guys had any information about that? I don't know that any of the magistrates have ordered anything like that, but I know they put that in place recently.
Yeah, weird. Can you come up to the microphone? Thank you.
I'm going to ask Constance Holloway, our legal person, to answer that question. That's outside of my scope today.
Gary, we are aware of the case, and we are working in conjunction with the general counsel at DMH to try to challenge the case. We filed a petition with the Supreme Court. That was right in the midst of COVID, and we were waiting on the ruling from that petition because both DMH and our agency had some concerns with magistrates being able to order competency evaluations. So we're still awaiting on a ruling from the Supreme Court on that order. On that petition.
I'm kind of curious as to, and again, this not to get personally involved in this, but what are the concerns?
I think from DMH, the concern is the cost that will be associated and the staff that would be needed to be hired to be able to do those evaluations. As you're aware, I mean, the charges in magistrate court are primarily misdemeanors, and DMH and DDSN had concerns with absorbing that amount of cost for those type of misdemeanor charges. But as that I'm aware of, there has not been any magistrate just yet to order evaluation.
Yeah, okay. I'm just kind of curious because as the order, as it came down, required that the prosecuting agency bear the cost of the evaluation. So it appears to me like the cost should be funded by somebody else.
Yes, and so the Attorney General also joined in the petition because they
Gotcha.
don't bear the cost.
Gotcha. Okay.
And then we have the capacity issue.
Yes.
Right. I understand. Yeah, I understand from a capacity issue. So, okay. All right.
For those of us who don't know, I'm sorry, can you define DMH? What is that?
Department of Mental Health.
So we have an evaluation done, Barry, on criminal responsibility. It'll depend on what the basis is. It a mental health issue, or is it a developmental disability that might cause an issue with competency to stand trial or ability to be prosecuted under the McNaughton standard, which is the criminal responsibility standard, basically. So depending on what the issue was with the client, we would either have the evaluation done by a representative DMH or DVSN, depending on what the underlying question was about the person's competency.
Oh, and then they have to prove competent or not competent to stand trial, basically.
Essentially, yes. So, all right.
That's not an easy thing to prove. I mean, usually they are competent to stand trial unless proven otherwise.
Yeah, I mean the standard essentially is they have to be a very high level of incompetence before.
Right.
It's gonna.
I would think so. Isn't that right? There has to be a very high level of incompetence not to.
Yeah, under the McNaughton standard, which is the legal standard, it's a very high standard. I've had a lot of these evaluations done. I think I maybe have had one or two in my career that have come back as not competent.
Interesting. Moving on.
Yes, that's getting way segued into my personal background on this.
Yes, I'm sorry.
No, that's my fault. Any other questions or comments? All right. Then all in favor of the proposed amendments to this particular policy, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none, then those modifications are approved. Next item on the agenda.
Thank you so much. So we're at 60313, which focuses on medication technician certification. Again, these revisions have been made by staff and externally reviewed and then refined accordingly to make sure that the language is consistent with the proviso, which allows for unlicensed persons to provide certain medications in certain settings. So we've reviewed this to make sure it's consistent with all requirements and that it's clearer. And we've had medically trained staff as well look at this and suggest these revisions. So we're presenting them today for your approval.
We would ask that would be a motion coming out of the policy committee.
Okay.
To make these changes.
Any questions, comments regarding these proposed changes? All right. Hearing none, then would entertain, or all in favor of the proposed changes, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none, that those proposed changes are adopted unanimously. Next item.
Thank you. We're at 700-02, which is a very long title focused on compliance with these requirements of Title VI, the Age Discrimination Act, Section 504, and also outlines establishment of a complaint process if anyone would believe that we're not in compliance with those requirements. So this was referred to staff to review. We've already put it out for external review, and because we have a new, fairly new, she's not new anymore, legal division, legal counsel, she's also reviewed those to make sure that all the citations are correct and the requirements are in line with what we should be doing. So we're presenting these edits on this document for your approval.
That should come as a motion from the policy committee to make these changes. We did look into this and asked that they look at them specifically, and our lawyer to look at them again whenever we were in policy committee, and they have, and so we're ready for approval.
Okay. All right. Any additional questions, comments regarding the proposed changes? All right, hearing none, all in favor of the modifications as proposed, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none, those modifications are approved. Next item on the agenda.
Okay, this is my last item, and it's not a document for approval, it's just an update. Based on referral from the policy committee for staff to review and then bring back to the commission, we've looked at 50210, which is focused on transition of individuals from regional centers to community. I just wanted to forecast for you all that we'll be putting that out for external review based on the level of revision we're recommending. We feel like when there's a substantial amount of change that sometimes it's important to put those documents out for a second external review period. So again, you know, we're kind of improving things as far as clarity and procedure when it's required to transition individuals. So we'd like to just provide that update today, and then we'll bring it to you, to the commission, for approval at a future time after that external review period has taken place. That concludes my update.
And that external review is how long? 10 days?
10 business days.
Correct. That's what
Minimum.
we changed it to. Yeah.
Yes.
The same thing. Okay. Does everybody understand that? That's for 10 days, and then I don't know if they'll be ready to come back to us by next month or not. We'll see.
Okay.
I don't know if we'll be ready to bring it up as approval or not at that time, because it's in staff, so we'll just have to see. But I'll be talking to Susan a lot more times than once between now and then, so we'll find out.
Great. Any further matters coming out of the policy committee, Barry?
No, sir. I have no more at this time.
Okay. And just want to express my thanks to everybody on that committee and Susan and the rest of the staff for working so hard. You guys are really focusing on getting these policies reviewed, and very much appreciate that. That's a long overdue and being done at a very good pace. So thank you very much.
Chairman, if I could just say one thing, David here.
Yes, sir.
Well, our chairman of our committee, Mr. Malthus, he's a slave driver. I just want you to know that. The poor staff and the poor committee members, we demand double our pay because he gets that whip out. Well,
we can take it.
I tell you something, he is diligent and precise, and I have really enjoyed being on his committee. I really have.
Thank you very much. Very kind of you to say that.
We really appreciate the work that you guys are doing. So, all right. Thank you for those comments, David. Any other comments before we move on to the old business? All right. Hearing none, would then move on to old business. The first item under that is the case management report from Lori Manos. Lori, recognize you.
Good morning. Thanks for letting me come speak to you today. If you look on pages 315 to 322 in your packet, you have the monthly memo that was sent out related to case management, as well as a few slides. I'm going to try to be kind of quick because I know we have a lot to go over today. The good news is in June, we had a pretty good increase in revenue by individual. So we went up to $110.14 per person. That was up from $101.33 per person in May. The thing to recognize here is that amount is the third highest average billing per person we've had since we went to fee-for-service billing. And that happened in the time of the COVID-19 pandemic, where people are not billing the higher rate as often because there's still not a lot of travel that's going on in face-to-face units. So the case management providers really kind of did a great job this month. We did have an increase in billing days, but even so, I just think it's pretty significant that they did so well. The billing errors and the Medicaid eligibles continue to be minimal. We had 368 people that we serve this month who didn't have a contact. That represents about 3% of the waiver population. That number is a decrease from May, where it was 3.9%, 400 and some odd consumers. But the issue with those, we've kind of taken a look at them every month, and I think the good news is it's not the same people every month that are not having contact. There's kind of reasons that sometimes we can't get in touch with folks, but it's not like we have one person who stays in that 3% every month, people who haven't had contact for many months in a row. Again, we're continuing to adapt our service delivery during this pandemic. Most activities are being completed telephonically, but we do have some folks that are doing kind of creative driveway visits, porch visits for families that are comfortable with it. For provider terminations, I reported to you last month that we received notice from Pickens DSN board that they would terminate their contract effective 6/30. They did not get all of the people transitioned to new providers by 6/30, so they're continuing to operate case management right now until we can have a seamless transition. They still have about 90 cases that they're trying to move out and get to new providers. They have notified everybody. I think when I talked to them last week, their issue is around copying files and actually getting physical records moved. So the good news is their case management staff was going to transition into other roles within the agency, so they're still there and they're still able to provide that level of service. We did receive a new notifications from Patterson's Academy on their intent to terminate their case management program effective July the 15th. Again, they don't have everybody moved just yet, even though they intended to end on July 15th. But they're a very small provider anyway. They only had 42 total cases, and only 6 of them were receiving active case management. None of them were enrolled in a waiver. So they're planning on continuing the provision of case management until we can get those cases moved. Do you guys have any questions for me?
And that's a private provider anyway, correct?
It is. It's a really small provider. They do early intervention. They did not terminate their early intervention contract, so they're continuing to do EI, but it just wasn't feasible for them to continue to do case management.
Any questions at all for Lori? Any comments?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Lori.
It's nice to hear that case management is continuing to provide services at a high level during this COVID time. That's a good thing, because we need to be monitoring these families out in the community too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very good. It's wonderful to know that the sky is not falling in regards to case management, as we heard a year or so ago, over a year ago.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? All right. Next on the agenda is the early intervention report. Would recognize Joyce Kimmery.
Thank you so much. I always appreciate the opportunity to talk about early intervention with you. Our numbers for June looked really good in early intervention, and I'm sorry, we're on 323 in your packet.
Okay.
Early intervention was up by, and for ages 3 to 6, up almost $98,000 from your May numbers until June, looking at about $854,000 total billing for 3 to 6. which is, I think, just amazing during this period. It shows that our early interventionists are slowly going back out to see families. They're being creative in their methods for seeing families, just as Lori said, with some porch visits, some garage visits, and an early interventionist even who did paperwork through a screen door. So they're being creative, they're providing services to families, and they're getting back out into their communities. Of the $854,000 billed, about 10% of that was billed under telehealth, family training and service coordination. So that tells us that our families are being served and being seen. Of course, the early interventionists are keeping the best services for the family in mind. If the family is declining face-to-face, of course, they don't provide face-to-face, and they are making alternate arrangements to see families. We did have, if you recall, last month, 2 boards who had ended their EI line of service. That was Burton Center and Charles Lee Center. They transitioned all consumers by June 30th. Either they transferred to case management, they went to other EI providers, or they closed as appropriate. So all consumers were transitioned on time. And for new early intervention providers, last month, I told you that we welcomed 3 new early intervention providers. Those providers are up and running and accepting early intervention cases, and we expect to provide a new provider orientation either late July or early August for 2 more new early intervention providers, and we'll be glad to welcome those. I think that says to us that early intervention is vibrant and growing, and that people want to be early intervention providers. We have a total now of 74 providers, and services throughout the state with all counties and all areas represented. And that was all I had. Questions?
Okay. Thank you for that update. Any questions or comments?
You said all did you say all counties are represented?
Yes, they are.
Thank you, ma'am.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you, Joyce.
Thank you so much. Have a good day. Thank you, ma'am.
Next item on the agenda under new business will be the financial update. So recognize Chris.
Yes. Hello, everyone.
Chris.
All right. If you look at page 327, you have your standard financial report. With June's report come a couple disclaimers. We typically, when we finish a month, we're kind of on a cash basis. And so when we close the month, those monthly numbers are done. We're final. When it comes to year end, with June 30 being our fiscal year end, that period has to stay open. And so as a result, we have to pick a day and just basically issue a draft, which is what we've done. It was as of July 6th. And so our actual books closed on the 14th, which was Tuesday, and they're actually still open for a variety of journal entries and so forth. So we really don't have the ability to give you a final June report at this point, but we can, and I don't remember if we did this last year or not, but we can give you that in August when we report. If you want to get a July report in a final June, we should have something at that point. So if that's something you would like, just let me know. Is that something you'd like to have, Commissioner?
So my recollection is we did not do that last year, but that's just my recollection. But I do think that would be appropriate. Would welcome feedback from the rest of the commission on that as well.
I think that'd be an appropriate thing to do.
Okay.
This is Barry.
Yeah, it's not a heavy lift, so we can easily do that, and I do think that's prudent. So we'll report that back in August along with the July report. We did finish the year, and again, these aren't final numbers, 10% below our spending plan. For those of y'all that are new on the commission, just realize that we have authorization, which means with the state we can go up to $808 million. But again, due to our inability to bill efficiently and develop rates adequately with HHS, we're unable to draw down that full $808 million, which we get all of our state appropriation, which is about $270 million. And to the extent we can leverage that and draw down FMAP or federal funds, we could go up to 808. but we're not able to do that right now. We're getting better at that. As you know, a lot of the projects we're working on are looking at our rates, which are a lot of them not only are rate changes needed for us, but also our provider network. So if you look at our spending plan, which is our budget, basically our internal budget, it was $770 million, and we only spent $693 million, leaving a 10% surplus, or $77 million unspent budget, if you will. $115 million of authorization left on the table, if you will, that we weren't able to spend or did not spend, which is about 15% remaining. Our cash balance at the end of the year was very favorable. Again, due to the close of business on the 14th, we were unable to run a June accurate cash number because it's very time consuming, believe it or not, the process we go through to get that done. So with the skeletal crew here due to COVID, I told them to hold off and get the closeout done, so they wouldn't, be overly stressed down there. We're going through a lot. We will have also a final June cash figure for y'all at the August meeting, but we do expect it to be north of $20 million that we had in cash. And of particular note, I would say, is that the FMAP money is below that $20 million. So that cash balance that we're going to see is not only due to FMAP. We've actually turned a corner operationally outside of FMAP, where we were going to report a positive cash balance this year prior to having those funds. So I'm real proud of Pat and Rufus and the rest of the team that have spent a lot of time focusing in on our state-funded services, making sure that we get folks Medicaid eligible, our provider network as well, really focusing on their billing efficiency, including case management being one of those. So we're actually really moving in the right direction financially as an agency. The only other issue I was going to mention is I have not really, up until the last couple weeks, I haven't really looked at our cost reports that we're getting in from our provider network. And as we've done that, we've noticed that there's we almost get 39 versions of cost reports, to be honest. We have 39 providers, and honestly, as you flip through them, even if they had the same auditor, we are getting so many versions of these reports, and a lot of them are not accurate and not incomplete. And as I have said many times, even to the provider network, we have to look at ourselves because of this problem, not the providers. We have done a very poor job of educating, training, and supporting our providers as it relates to those reports. In fact, I don't think they've ever had any feedback from us in regards to, hey, this is what you sent in, this is what you need to do better. So we're trying to develop a training guide, and we're also in the process of trying to schedule a training at the end of August. We hope to do that in a socially distanced, face-to-face manner. So right now we're looking at trying to find a venue, and we're looking at August 25th right now as our date. But we have got to move the needle, on provider training in regards to these cost reports, because, the amount of energy that we need to spend fixing things and ensuring that we are accurate in our reporting hinges greatly on the quality of the reports we get from the providers. And that is my report.
Any questions regarding the financial report? Chris, and I'm not asking for a hard number, but roughly what would our year-end cash supply have been without the bonus money, the K money?
Well, we lost some billing efficiency, and we had a clawback or 80 adult day program recoupment that you all voted on. So there's a lot of moving pieces there. But prior to the shutdown, what we were looking at was around 2 to 3 million positive cash flow if things were left unaltered.
Okay. And that was compared
But
to
if
something
we
like,
back out the FMAP, we're looking at about $4 or $5 million that we had without that being part of the equation.
and last year, this time, as I recall, that was somewhere around 100,000, 150,000.
Correct.
Yeah. So
Correct.
it's obviously a huge difference. Okay. Other questions?
Isn't it true that a lot of our cost report problems were because we weren't even bothering to fill them out in the previous administration and before you?
Yes.
I mean, thanks to the person who used to do your job called a different position, but basically
Yes.
was nice enough to take the state's money without doing much work.
Well, to be clear, the providers have nothing to do with that. We cannot point the finger at them for our not filing our cost report. They have done their jobs, albeit we need to improve the quality of what they're turning in. But we cannot use that as an excuse. So yes, we are actually trying to rebuild our ability to do our own cost reports at this point. We have identified staff internally, as well as working closely with the CPA firm in Maryland to build out our capacity and ability to do our cost reports, because nobody here knows how to do it. So we're actually actively working on 18 and 19 right now. And then the CPA firm is working on 13 through 15 and have a plan to get those done in the next 2 to 3 months. They've got a statement of work with HHS with deadlines, and so we've been meeting with them actively. And then 17 sitting in my office waiting for me to finalize.
And Chris, is Greenwood Genetics waiting for instructions on how to do their cost reports? Like, where's that?
Their costs reporting is a non-factor in regards to anything at this point. I mean, it doesn't impact our contracts with them at all at this point. And secondarily, it really is a non-factor in regards to cost reporting currently. We're seeking some guidance from HHS in regards to the proper means to report their cost, because historically the people prior to me were reporting it in one manner, but Pat and I think we might need to report it in a different manner. So until we get that clarification, we can't really advise the genetics center on what changes they need to make.
So they're just doing it the way they've been doing it while they wait. Okay.
Yeah, we don't want to advise them to change something when we don't know
Right, if it needs
what
to be
the final answer needs to look like.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I have none.
Chris, thank you for being here today. Appreciate it.
Sir, am I excused?
Yes, sir.
Thank you for your work, sir.
All right. Next item up, it's under new business, probably could have been under old business, but is the consideration of the bid for the HVAC replacement at Coastal Center. Is Andrew there?
Good morning, everyone. First of all, I want to thank the commission again for the opportunity that we had last week to kind of sit down with you guys and go over some of this stuff. I hope we were able to present it in a way that made sense and that helped you get a better understanding. Commissioner Thomas, I know you got kind of cut out of the call during that meeting, so I hope all your answers or the questions or answers to all your questions, you were able to get those as well. I could go over the bid numbers again, but I kind of wanted to ask the commission if you guys had any other questions about the system or why we were doing what we were doing, or to follow up on the meeting from last week.
I think that's appropriate, Andrew. Does anybody have any questions for Andrew at this point?
Chairman, I do not. I have I'll tell you what, I could just go ahead and make a motion to approve the HVAC system and get us into a brief discussion.
Commissioner Rawlinson will second that motion.
If we could, before we make any motions, was there anybody who had any questions for Andrew about the bids before any motions came out? I just want to make sure everybody's heard.
This is Ed Miller. I'm satisfied.
All right. So hearing no questions for Andrew, Commissioner Thomas, if you want to make your motion.
Yeah, I move that we approve the HVAC system for Coastal.
I second that motion. This is Commissioner Rawlinson.
And I believe then we would specifically, are you to approve the recommended bid from McCarter Mechanical?
Yes.
Okay.
Let's include that. I think there were two others.
Correct.
Yes, there were two other bids, Case Company and Triad Mechanical. That's
and the recommendation was for the McCarter Mechanical.
You want them as a separate motion or all together?
Well, I think the motion to approve, I think one of the things we need to do is if we are going to accept one of those bids or not, is essentially where we're at right now.
Well, my motion is to accept the HVAC for Coastal.
Under the recommended bid?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to clarify that. So that would be the McCarter Mechanical bid of $444,000 and change. Is that what you want to second, Commissioner Rawlinson?
That is correct.
Okay, treat that as a motion and second. Discussion with regard to that motion.
Yeah, the Chairman, just real quick, I had sent out to all the members on July the 6th a memo, and this, this whole big area of your ESCOs that I include in the letter, which are your energy savings corporations, it's kind of become somewhat of a phenomenon. Now, I don't know if it's a good phenomenon or not. I'm kind of neutral one way or the other. I was approached by Chip Felkel, an old friend of mine who's working for Schneider Electric, which is an ESCO. And he was explaining this to me. I had a couple of discussions with some of the leadership locally from Schneider, and I summarized what I had in the document that I sent out on the 6th. And I would ask that my letter either be, let me, Chairman, include my text message, or it might have been an email. I think it was an email, excuse me, an email of July 6th, or I could read it into the record because it's fairly brief, but it explains what I think might be an interesting thing for staff to be looking at and analyzing and seeing if possibly DDSN could, benefit with savings that such a monitoring company could do. It might be it's no good. I don't know. It might be it's great. I don't know. But I thought that it was innovative enough to bring before the commission, and that's why I wrote the commission and staff and copied that. I can take 30 seconds to read the memo, Chairman, if that's okay.
I think both, quite frankly. I don't see a reason if you wish to read it. I think that's fine, and I think we could certainly attach it into the minutes as well. I have no objection to that. Unless
greetings. I say greetings to all, and that's again to the staff and the commission. Hope all of you had a terrific holiday. This Thursday we have a phone conference to hear and discuss the HVAC system for Coastal Carolina facility. It is called a VRF system, variable refrigeration flow, and is thought of as state of the art. Some of us have various questions, which I think can be dealt with without much time consumption. The real issue has to do with the current state of art for what a large industrial system with multiple locations should do by way of a whole systems analysis, and that's capped, and the potential savings that can be obtained if certain pathways are followed. By savings, I mean reduced energy costs as well as health benefits on top of efficiencies. Leading the way on this whole systems approach, rather than a piecemeal approach, is the National Association of Energy Services Companies. and then suggest that this can be linked to look at what the association stands for. The standard for whether or not to bring on board an energy services company is first initiated by a free capped business case analysis, and business case analysis is a term of art that is used, which is a high-level overview of an individual entity. The issue being, can an energy services company manage the development of energy systems of the entity, such as an industry, a school system, etc.? If the analysis is good, then an RFQ is issued, and upon deciding that an energy services company, ESCO, ESCO, is warranted, then DDSN staff could recommend or not recommend entering into something called an investment grade audit, IGA. There's those acronyms, Mr. Chairman, that we talked about earlier, which has the ESCO partner oversee the whole, not piecemeal, approach to the system's energy program. We would be guaranteed a savings amount, which might be 15% and possibly as much as 30%. The energy savings following South Carolina code laws relative to ESCO plannings could save a guaranteed amount of money. Notice the front end analysis costs nothing. It is free. Only if we decided to contract and follow through is there a financial commitment. I will forward you links to more information on ESCO advantages, but as I say, we can proceed with the coastal issue contract, which apparently would not disadvantage us in the IGA, and that was the investment grade audit, at zero expense to DDSN. Such a free look-see by the Commission demonstrates that we are truly engaged in actively examining all energy alternatives. Then I asked this question, would an ESCO partner be good for DDSN? That's what a free business case analysis would tell us, and potential RFQ responders. Remember, if the ESCO partner failed to obtain the guaranteed savings, and the ESCO partner is on the hook to reimburse DDSN for the difference. Last paragraph. Now I will, and so will you, if we proceed with such a route as I have suggested, we will all have verified my understanding of the facts as I have outlined above. Maybe I am incorrect, and if so, I will certainly correct any misinformation. However, if my understanding of the ESCO route is correct, free and with guaranteed energy savings, it would be an obviously wise decision. And that ends the letter that I sent out, except the goodbyes. I still hold to sort of the position that if something is free, and if we invite or ask staff to give us an analysis of whether or not ESCOs are good, and possibly might be something that could save us money at two levels, we're basically proceeding very carefully because I don't want the department to get into some contract that is deleterious or a problem. I'm neutral on this. I have no dog in the fight one way or the other. I don't know this company that I talked to briefly. They're the ones that inform me of what the phenomenon is out in the world, where ESCOs, ESCOs, where ESCOs are actively engaged and bring home apparently substantial savings. And I stand to be corrected. I mean, if it turned out we looked at this and started examining such a thing for energy savings issues and health issues and all that, it could very well be that we might hear some horror stories of entities that have gone into relationship with ESCOs and it just not be a good outcome. I'm open to that. That's fine. I mean, obviously, then we would not proceed. But anyway, having this come to our attention, or at least to my attention, I wanted to make it just something that the whole commission could think about, take a look at, and again, I have no dog in the fight. There it is. I just researched it, got some information, tried to summarize as best I could, Mr. Chairman, what possibly the commission might look at. Again, and it wouldn't cost us anything to possibly have staff give us some insights. So there it is, and I'm putting that out to just see if there's response on the part of the commission for what little bit is here, And we do have one member that's got an energy background, obviously, and maybe he knows more about ESCOs than I'll ever know. So there it is, and I'll stop with that and see kind of where the commission, what the commission feels about this issue.
Thank you, Commissioner Thomas. Had you forwarded that email? I know when you sent it to us, was Sandra included in your distribution at that point in time?
I'll have to look. I think I sent it to.
Or Mary?
Okay. Commissioner Thomas, I just to give you some numbers, and we do track our.
Hang on.
I got it, and I forwarded it to staff.
Okay, all right. Just give me 1 second, Andrew. All right. So what I'm going to ask, in addition to it being read, then, if the email itself can be included as part of the minutes, attached to the minutes, I think, to make sure that that gets in its complete form, in addition to what we have on the video. So appreciate that. What I'd like to do then is maybe let's get a vote on the motion, and then under this, let's go ahead and circle back and let Andrew weigh in and the rest of the commission weigh in just in general on that question that's raised in the email, if that's okay with you, Commissioner Thomas.
Yes.
Just keep things clean, because what we have right now is we have a motion and a second, so we have a pending motion that I want to make sure we're addressing before we get onto anything else. So any other questions, comments with regard to the proposed bid for the HVAC replacement at Coastal Center? Okay. Hearing none, all in favor of accepting that particular bid as contained in the motion, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. Hearing none, that particular part of the motion addressing on this issue is passed. So that bid is accepted. So before we get, I'm gonna let you say something, Andrew, but with regard to the question that was raised just in general under the email that Commissioner Thomas just read, does anybody from the commission have any comments or feedback or thoughts with regard to that at this point? Okay. Now, Andrew, I know you wanted to say something, so I'll recognize you at this point. Thank you for your patience.
I'm good for the most part. I just want to thank Commissioner Thomas for his engagement in the issue and his interest in this matter. Energy savings is something that we always look to pursue when we do a project, and I just like to hear it from the commission that there is an interest in that on y'all's part. So again, just want to thank y'all for the opportunity to explain this stuff, and we can absolutely look into some of the things that Commissioner Thomas is suggesting. So.
Yeah, what I would suggest is that we do that, and that staff, be prepared to circle back around on this issue to let us know whether it's something that's appropriate or not in their opinion, and we can then entertain a motion based on having a little bit more information at that point in time. Is that acceptable to everybody on the commission?
Yeah.
Okay.
That sounds like what we should do to me.
Okay, great.
We'll put it back under old business if that's okay with you, Barry, so we don't lose it.
Yes, that should be under old business. That's correct. Okay. All right, Andrew. Anything else from your end on this?
That's it.
Okay.
Really, the old business part should probably say energy company, right? Something like
Energy review, savings review program. Or we'll give it the exact name that's in Commissioner Thomas's email, okay?
Correct.
The bid part's over, so we're moving on from that.
Okay, correct. Great. Okay. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.
Okay. Next item on the agenda is the State Director's Report.
We're just moving the players into place. I'm going to try to gently move this microphone because it's sometimes very, very sensitive. Okay. Thank you. To start, I want to add something to my report that I wasn't planning on saying, but I want to clarify for the record that the link to the public comment page, the Survey Monkey page, was given out in the actual announcement for the meeting. It is now a permanent fixture to our website. Okay, but it was sent out in the announcement, and it will be continually sent out in the announcement. So whoever gets that email can have the link. All right, I do want to have a couple of things before we get into the report on COVID. I want everyone to know that the states, that the federal government, CMS, has granted an additional year to demonstrate compliance, and we should all ensure all settings are in full compliance with the HCBS settings criteria, more commonly known as CMS's final rule. That's how we've been speaking about it. So March 17th, 2023 is the date to demonstrate compliance, replaces the March 17th, 2022 timeline. So basically, we've got to get all of our packets and everything together by July 1st, 2021. It was supposed to be this month, but we knew that with COVID, this was going to be a severe problem because folks have other things on their minds other than putting those evidentiary packets together. But I do want the commission to know we're going to continue to work with providers to meet that timeline. We're not going to slow our efforts down. We're just going to keep on moving in that direction. So we are done well before the July 2021 deadline. All right, any questions about that? And if anyone needs more training on what the final rule actually entails, please let me know, and I'll be able to either provide that training myself or get you with a staff member who's more of an expert on that. All right, and the other thing is the Appendix K submission. The Department of Health and Human Services, or affectionately known as DHHS, worked with us yesterday to come up with the final version. And I know that it was submitted. I'm not sure if it was submitted yesterday or this morning, but I got confirmation that it was submitted. The emphasis for this Appendix K is on retainer payments for community-based waiver services that have been affected by the COVID pandemic. We're also working with HHS to figure out a way to get PPE directly into the hands of our families and our individuals that we support in the community that are not affiliated with a program that would have those supplies. So that's what we're working on now. And we continue to work with HHS on refining the enrollment process to develop a more efficient way to enroll individuals in the waiver. We know that we have way too many people in that pending status and we need to move them through. And hold on one sec. Sorry, sinus medicine. As we enter July under the CMS public health emergency, we will now know, we now know that the FMAP increase will go the rest of this quarter. You know, we had said when you started a quarter, it'll finish that quarter, even if the emergency is lifted during that time. So as of now, we know we'll be entering our second quarter. We received approximately $8 million over this past quarter, in addition to the $9.1 million that we had gotten at the first go round. And today we're attending a webinar on how to access funding for the CARES Act received by the state. The CARES Act money that was actually received by the state of South Carolina. There is a webinar being done by the state to actually see how we can access that money and what exactly the cost that will be, that could be used to pull down those federal funds. So we're addressing that at the moment. Okay, any questions about any of those items? Okay, now to get into the switching gears and getting into the COVID report. We've had significant detail to add to our report on our current Witten Center illnesses. But I do want, before we get into that, I want us to remember that we had a significant cluster of illnesses in our PD center back in April. At that time, we lost 2 individuals, and the remaining 24 are now all fine and doing well. We have had 39 staff at PD center who was sick, and they have recovered and are doing well. We learned a lot from that experience and the work done by Amy McLean and her team as they were the first to enter into that COVID positive arena. Amy's been informing and assisting the other centers as they prepare for the inevitable, which we believe, it's coming in as the community in cases increase. Our staff live in the community, so we know we're going to see cases in a congregate care setting. And it's something that all congregate care settings who rely on staff to provide close proximity care. They're going to face this if the virus doesn't simply go away. And from what the looks of things are, it's not simply going away. So we see in the community as more and more cases are popping up. In the community, we've lost 9 individuals and 4 staff. Our regional centers have lost 4 individuals, 2 at PD and 2 at Whitten, and we've lost a staff member at Whitten. Randy Davis and his team, with assistance from Amy, Rufus, and Pat, who have been physically on the ground at Whitten Center, were thrust into that fight when Lawrence County found itself in the hot seat of COVID. We are also seeing cases at our coastal center, and the administrator there has been steadily readying his team for the COVID challenge. They have 10 individuals testing positive, 4 in the hospital, and 31 staff who are positive. So you can see the relation between staff and individuals. There's usually at least a 2, if not more, 1 ratio of staff to consumers. We've been open and honest with everyone, the individuals, the staff, the families, and the media. We have put our numbers as well as all our procedures and what was done in writing and have given all that to the media, not just as Commissioner Thomas said, I guess it is Channel 7 in Greenville. I haven't lived there in a long time, but also to the Greenwood Index Journal and anybody else who has requested that. I just can't make them print all our numbers. As I've said in my bullet points, we'll continue to attack this unseen enemy as a team. And to that end, I'm calling on my team to give you some additional information since they've been directly on the ground. I did spend a day at Whitten Center talking about procedures and looking at interviewing staff and looking at the PPEs that were present. It was there. I like to say that folks were operating at full tilt. They were doing a wonderful job. They were calm. They were collected, even in the face of everything that they were facing at the time. So Pat Malley is going to talk about Whitten Center, but Rufus Britt is going to bring us up to date on the community because the community residential providers has also seen a huge hit in increasing cases. As you all know, we've been sending you data all along. And then we have Randy Davis, who is our Whitten facility administrator. He will be online to answer any questions. We'll do this in a manner where we will all answer your questions. I did not want to simply read the email that I sent you with regards to our fact checking of the SPA article. The reason being that fact checking had some serious amount of personnel information in it for the consumption of the commission members, not for the general public, because you know I can't really go into that. But we don't terminate our staff on a whim. We terminate on cause, and frequently we have video data to back us up with that. So that being said, I'm going to let Rufus talk a little bit about what's going on in the community, because I don't want to leave them out of this discussion. It's really serious. They're handling something that is been very difficult for all of them, especially as you lose the people you've been supporting all these years. So.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, commissioners, for allowing us to brief you on this very important and subject. As Mary mentioned, we're going to go over numbers, but it's important to keep in mind that there are people behind these numbers.
Excuse me, this is David. Could you get your microphone a little closer, please?
How about now? Is it
That's
better?
Right. That's perfect.
Okay, perfect. As I was saying, I'm going to go over some figures, but it's important to keep in mind that there are people behind these figures. Providers, as well as the regional center staff, have been preparing for this crisis since early March. We actually started at the DDSN back in February with starting our preparedness for this virus. No one could have ever predicted the impact on an operational level in terms of just the multitude of variables that you have to plan for, and then the things that you can't plan for and you hope never happen. We're seeing that as this virus emerges and as it spreads so rapidly throughout our system. Last night and this morning, you received the email from Deputy Director Maley that has some notes, so that should be in your inbox if you haven't already printed it out. But these numbers are effective as of 7/14, July 14th. Our system-wide figures for individuals served and staff testing positive for COVID was 622, with 218 of those representing individuals that we support, and 404 representing members of our workforce. Break that down from a community standpoint versus regional center. The number of individuals residing in the community residential settings testing positive for COVID-19 as of 7/14 was 128. And for staff affiliated with community residential settings, that number was 235. Compare that to the regional centers for the same period. We had 90 individuals testing positive in our care and 169 staff. The importance of the first chart that you'll look at, it's a 14-day spread, and you see that the numbers more than doubled between over that time period. So you see on the news every day about how this virus is rapidly spiking, and we're seeing that not only in our state but also in our settings, particularly settings that have multiple individuals living under the same roof. The next two slides give you some trend analyses. The first chart has vertical bars that represent the number of staff testing positive for a 1 month period. And then the gold or orange bars represent individuals served. And as you can see, this virus has continually spread throughout our community provider network, with the number of individuals testing positive increasing, pretty much on a steady pace throughout the month of June into July. That trend held constant for the regional centers. And again, we'll talk about the market difference in trend at Witten Center. And there's some things that we're analyzing that support how it spread. But the regional centers had the same trend, and that we're starting to see staff, uptick in staff testing positive for COVID, and a number of individuals that we support testing positive. And as Mary mentioned, right now the pace is about 2 to 1, 2 staff testing positive to 1 consumer. Mary talked about the deaths. This virus is lethal. We have lost 14 individuals affiliated with our system. 1 death is 1 death too many. And so the agency has taken every precaution, as well as providers, to keep people safe. There's not a day that has gone by since really the beginning of March, even before the state of emergency, to where providers weren't calling and trying to prepare themselves. Our agency meeting, for several months daily, and we continue to meet daily, to talk about emergency operations, and cover statistics. But when you start talking about deaths and people dying, that's when it gets serious. And so as Mary pointed out, and I just want to restate, we've had 14 deaths. 5 of the individuals who have passed away were individuals that we serve in the community residential settings. 4 were members of community providers workforce. In our regional centers, we lost 4 individuals that we cared for, and 1 staff to date. Well, we do have 1 staff member that is in the hospital, and there may be more because these numbers are fluid. But as of 7/14, we have 1 staff that remains hospitalized, and the prognosis is not good. And so we're definitely keeping all of these folks in our thoughts and prayers. Witten Center, is getting a lot of attention, and I'm thankful for Randy being on the line, and I'm thankful for the staff who have stayed committed to the mission at Witten Center. People can throw out a lot of facts and figures and information, but we spent time on the ground there, and there are a lot of dedicated staff. And last night it couldn't have been more timely, but we received a couple positive notes and expressions of prayers from folks. But a nice note came from a mother of a child at Witten Center, unsolicited, and she also copied some members of the General Assembly, as well as State Director Poole. But it just really spoke to, it kind of resurged, because we're all tired, if you can't tell. A number of folks, Randy is working shifts. Members of his executive team have taken ill. We have direct support professionals, nursing personnel, housekeeping showing up daily, working tremendous hours. And again, and Pat's going to talk about more of the specifics relative to Witten Center, but I'd be remiss if I didn't personally thank them, not as a matter of record, because personally, you know, this would be a major travesty or tragedy if it weren't for their continued commitment. And they are working under duress. And all of the inquiries require that we bug them for paperwork or drive down and disrupt operations. And we'll continue to do that because we want the truth. We have nothing to hide, you know, because again, that's why we all chose this line of work. So thank you, Randy, and thank you to the team at Witten Center. There are a couple of charts that highlight the impact of COVID-19 at Witten Center that are in your inbox, or if you hadn't printed it out. Those slides really reflect the velocity and how fast COVID can spread in congregate settings. Again, any questions that you guys have, you know, I'll address, but I do want to highlight a couple figures as it relates to Witten Center. And there's a chart in there that breaks down the breakout of COVID positives by county. And you can look at that at your leisure. I think it's interesting to note that for certain counties like Florence, where you have the DSM board that has several community operations, and then Mary spoke about the outbreak at PD Center, it was significantly different versus the numbers positive. PD Center had a number of staff and individuals to test positive, and tragically we lost 2 individuals that we support. And then you have Florence that right now basically has no cases. You know, and so it speaks to well, they have 3 and 6. So the numbers are significantly less, you know, in the smaller settings. But when you have large congregate settings where 10 or more individuals are living together and multiple staff coming in and out, it just makes it very, very hard to contain the virus once it is introduced into large congregate settings. So again, thank you to the staff on the front lines because they really are heroes. For Witten Center, and again, I don't want to steal Pat's thunder, but Witten Center, we had over 170 individuals to test positive. And that number is comprised of individuals supported and staff. To date, we have probably, it's not probably, but the number's fluid, but as of 7/14, 82% of all those testing positive were out of the 15 or 14-day quarantine period, so they're at 15 days plus. And again, so that to us is a sign of recovery. Again, with any statistics, there's always anomalies that you have to take into consideration. But again, it shows that we're on a downward trajectory. And the last slide that you have in your handout shows that as the number of cases increase markedly, you know, during really the first part of the end of June, first part of July, you start to see a lag in the number of individuals testing positive and the number of individuals that are beyond that 14-day quarantine period, that increased significantly. So that is a good trend that we hope to see. And we hope that we can prevent the spread in other parts of the state and particularly in the centers that we operate. We do have an outbreak at Coastal that is small as of now, but the folks there are doing a great job, and under Tommy's leadership, who's the facility administrator there, we're confident in his team in preventing the spread. So I'm going to turn it over to Pat Maley to talk about Witten Center.
I do want to say that if commissioners do not know, since you're new, while we're switching scenes here, that Witten is our largest. We have the most individuals living there, and we have the largest staff at that site. Go ahead.
All right. First of all, thank you for having me today. My role is to give you an overview of Witten's COVID-19 preparation, planning, and the actual outbreak. And the reason I'm doing is because obviously we all want to hear from Witten Center facility, Randy Davis, because he was on the ground and he can give you great perspective as to what was going on there for the last 3 weeks and the challenges they've had. This morning, before the meeting at 9:42, you're looking for the email, I sent you my 2-page notes only because I know as commissioners, I mean, this is a big deal. You have 170 positive COVID cases in a facility. That is something that we all have to pay great attention to. And I want you to be armed with the information to understand as well as answer constituent questions. And that's really the purpose of today. When I do my presentation, you'll notice I'll emphasize personal protective equipment probably a little more than I normally would. But the main reason I'm doing that is because that seems to be the core of the what I would call the negative media reporting on Witten. So bear with me if it looks a little idiosyncratic, but it's addressing some of the specifics provided in the reporting, which really weren't that much. On March 17th, day after the governor established a state of emergency in South Carolina, DDSN implemented a PPE strategy. The strategy was to, first of all, inventory all PPE in the system because, as you recall, back then, the country was at a deficit on available PPE. So we were going to inventory all our available PPE and co-locate it at each regional center in one place. That would facilitate the inventory, but more importantly, we would co-locate what limited PPE we had. I mean, it was sufficient for normal usage, but it wasn't sufficient for a pandemic. And that way, if a facility got hit, we could easily marshal all other PPE at other regional centers and bring it to that location to address the pandemic. So that was our initial strategy. And some of the negative media reporting was that at Witten, the PPE was collected after the pandemic and locked in a central place to give the appearance that it was withheld from staff. And that is untrue. It was done for strategic reasons, and it's done that way today for the same reasons. In April, Witten issued an advisory to staff that face masks could be used on a voluntary basis on campus. This was based on CDC advice that was encouraging voluntary use of masks. Back then, masks were not as mandatory as they are today. And it certainly in no way implied that masks were not to be used when dealing with COVID positive infected residents.
Which we had none at the time.
Which we had none at the time. And then shortly 2 weeks later on April 14th, we were able to secure cloth masks for all employees at the regional centers as well as in central office. I remember Rufus was so happy and scoring a shipment of masks. But at that time, Witten issued masks to all their employees and required them to wear them on campus like we do today, basically social distancing and maintain that level of protection among each other, even though there's not any known infection at the time. Again, that was kind of, if you read the newspaper article, it was kind of portrayed in a negative light as if we did not take masks seriously, which is certainly not the case. Based on CDC and DHEC guidance, Witten had a strategy of utilizing their PPE. And what you got to remember is once we issued cloth masks on April 14th to all our staff, they're in the residential buildings with masks, rubber gloves, which are always there, as well as the infecting protocols that we've been hearing and beating into ourselves on TV and in the workplace since this started. But we also have what we call enhanced PPE. And the difference is enhanced PPE is N95 masks, surgical masks, things that not only, it's a barrier to protect both the staff member as well as the patient. Gowns, goggles, face masks, the full package. And the strategy for PPE was, again, based on a level of efficiently using our resources as well as not depleting them, is they were issued when a residence had a residential consumer who tested positive. And so when you're taking care of someone who has positive COVID-19 infection, you need to have maximum PPE. and again, I'm only inferring what I'm reading in the newspapers, but the inference was that some staff there felt like they were not getting adequate PPE. And if I put myself in their shoes, I could probably see how they saw that, because if you're in a residence early during the outbreak and you see some residences getting the N95 masks, the surgical masks, the gowns, and you're not getting them, you may say, what about me? I can tell you part of our plan was if you had no resident who was COVID positive, you maintained your PPE. It just wasn't enhanced PPE until you had someone in the residence who tested positive. So I think that's an area of misperceptions that could cause some of the negative reporting. Now we're getting into the actual infection at Witten. Before I do that, let me talk about, there's another issue about reusing N95 face masks. Part of the inference was staff was not getting, when their N95s or surgical masks wore out, they had to use them for an inordinate amount of time, an unhealthy amount of time, because we were not providing replacements. I've personally gone to Witten on several occasions, and I have kicked the tires on this issue because that is just unacceptable. And based on my digging into the organization and asking people, interrogating people as to what is the use of resources, I couldn't find where there was any chilling effect on staff getting new PPE, new masks, if their existing staff had been worn out or was soiled. The notion of reusing masks is one of strategy, and actually it's part of the CDC strategy during the pandemic. It's not a one and done thing. We have to be judicious in our use of masks, but you have to use them to their useful life. You just don't turn them over every time you need a new mask. So I think that particular issue was one where I couldn't find anyone who was having a hard time replacing it, but at the same time, we had to be judicious in how we replaced it. The way Witten handed out his PPE was on June 17th, on or about June 17th, when the first building had positive infection symptoms. You had 3 or 4 staff and you had a couple of consumers who did their first COVID test on June 17th. When they suspected symptoms of COVID-19, the planning and preparation was to move them to a separate building where they could be quarantined and isolated from the rest of the campus. So the individuals, the residents in 107 that had symptoms, along with their roommates, as well as staff, were moved over to 209, and those that didn't have symptoms remained in 107. Enhanced PPE was given to 209, and surgical masks as part of the Witten plan, which is enhanced PPE, was given to staff in 107. Within a very short amount of time, they had another residence, 204, that became COVID positive, and at that time, they rolled out enhanced PPE, and I think Randy saw that this thing was spreading, and so he took the centrally located enhanced PPE and forward deployed it to all the residences in their nursing stations. But I just want to restate the whole PPE issue is some of the confusion could be different levels of PPE. Everybody had PPE on April 14th. People didn't have enhanced PPE until they had a COVID positive residence that they're caring for. If you look on that 2-page document, some of the questions that popped up pertain to just how the infection spread. 170 is a big number. What we looked at is our available data, and our best data source to understand how it spread was the tracking of both staff and residents' COVID tests. We kept very careful records as to when they were tested and when they got the results back, and certainly we tracked all the positive COVID tests. And when you look at that data, what you see, and if you have the 2-page in front of you, you'll see on page 2, the chart goes over the first 3 days. And what the first 3 days tells me, and I'm not an epidemiologist and I probably can't say it or spell it, but what it tells us is that 107, building 107 just was overwhelmed on day one with at least 6 staff and residents that had symptoms and had to be tested. But over the first 3 days, what we saw was staff in at least 6 of the 10 buildings at the center went in for testing and ultimately turned positive. And the second resident that was tested and turned out to be positive was on day 3. And so what that tells us is that it went not from it didn't go from a situation where it started in one building for many, many, many days and then spread. It got wide very quickly. And I think Randy will talk at length about that because he experienced it firsthand as far as the speed of how it spread on campus. Just a couple other facts. By day 7, which I put as June 23rd, positive COVID-19 staff were tested from 9 of the 10 residences. And by day 8, positive COVID residents were from 8 of the 10 residences. So within the first week, every building there except one was touched by positive testing. Another issue that seems to be brewing and lurking is the risk of staff cross-contaminating when you move staff from one building to another. And Randy speaks to this very eloquently, so I'll keep it very short. The way we operate centers pre-COVID and even post-COVID is we try to keep staff with the building because that way staff knows the residents, they know how to handle the behaviors, they develop relationships. It is just a positive thing to do. So we already had that built into our culture of staffing. So when this exploded, you certainly have to be mindful of moving staff from a building that has nobody testing positive to a building that's testing positive and then moving them back. But even with being mindful about that, you just have to look, and Randy will describe it very well. Within 3 days, we had 6 of the 10 buildings that were already contaminated with infection. And within a short amount of time, and I'll do a chart here in a second, it went from case 1 on June 17th, and we had 141 cases 14 days later, and all 141 were still in the quarantine period. That's how fast and that's how much the volume of work fell on caring for both the residents, and the number there was probably in the 40s, as well as the residual staff physically being out of work with the workload falling on those left. So when it comes to maintaining that discipline, I feel certain that that was the intent, but somewhere after day 3, 4, and 5, I don't think that became much of an issue because there was only one building left that truly was not infected with COVID-19. And lastly, I want to cover, and this is kind of I think the most important thing I'm trying to get across is, where are we today? And if you look at the last chart, the chart at the bottom of the page, when you look at that, I just want to explain it for a second. What that does is the line that starts as burgundy and goes up steep, and then it kind of turns into blue and kind of flattens. That's the total number of COVID-19 positive cases at Whitten. And right now we stand at 170 as of close of business Tuesday. So and then you see the orange line declining from that line. And what the orange line is it's measuring what we call the estimated infection active cases at Whitten. And the way we can get a ballpark of that is cases that are 15 days or older have great likelihood that the infection has cleared. Not always, but generally speaking, it's like 97%. And those under 14 are still in quarantine. So we would consider them as a greater chance of having active infection. So once we hit our high water mark on July 1st of 141 cases still within the first 14 days, afterwards, what you see on that blue line is the number of new cases has dramatically declined. And my estimation is we got one a day for the last 4 or 5 days. So it is definitely dropping. But at the same time, as you have declining new cases, you have large numbers of cases getting out of the 14-day quarantine period and basically becoming infection-free. And so what the orange line shows is the net effect of that. And if you look down as the orange is dropping, as of close of business Tuesday, we had 31 of our 170 cases were still in that 14-day window that we would consider active infection in those cases. So I think when you look at this, it gives you confidence that the infection is under control, that the cases are getting through quarantine, and our job is to stay on top of that so that we squeeze out every infection from the facility to get back to a state of no infection. So that's my overview.
And
Sure.
yeah, and I want to make sure that y'all understand that we are we're asking our staff, our managers, to do that management by walking around and to ensure people are wearing their PPEs properly. I mean, you can give somebody something to use, it doesn't mean they're using it properly. I myself had to say to one of the folks, it's like, your mask doesn't work if it's under your nose. But you walk around and you see people all the time that have their mask under their nose. And to come and say, well, who's patient zero? It could have been somebody who didn't have symptom 1, but was contagious. And we would not have any way of knowing that person was positive. In fact, I don't think we know a lot of the staff were positive. They didn't do a mass free testing in Lawrence at the high schools where everybody was showing up and going, because if you didn't have a symptom, you normally would not be tested at all. So we had a ton of staff go, no symptoms, and they come out positive. And so I just wanted to say that on Monday, Walmart starts mandatory testing, mandatory mask wearing, right? I don't want to be that greeter who has to say that at the doors of Walmart. But anyway, I was in Walmart last night to get an anniversary card because I forgot mine. And it was just every other person did not have a mask on, just to say. Every other person did not have a mask on. So even though we've been told it's not the most effective method of viral control, but it's the only thing we have at the moment. So we're encouraging our staff to understand not only wear your PPEs properly in the facility, but when you leave the facility, as a healthcare provider, you kind of have a responsibility to behave in a manner knowing that you are caring for very vulnerable people and you need to act in a manner where you're wearing that kind of protection outside also. So, but we're just trying to remind them we can't mandate what you do when you go home. We can't say, don't go to large gatherings, but we know people go. Don't go shopping at Walmart, but in Lawrence, you go shopping at Walmart. I lived there for 26 years. And then we tell them, wear your mask in public, do social distancing, and constantly wash your hands, even when you're not on duty. So we're trying to continue doing that. Randy, is there anything you want to add at this point?
I would just like to reiterate what has already been said. We have been very diligent in trying to prevent the spread of the virus here at Whitman. We began preparations back in March, preparing for what could occur. And as Pat said, our first positive cases with consumers was mid-June. And I think what we saw there, our community, the number of positives in the community in general was not high. But in mid-June, we began to see an increase across the board. And in the entire upstate, Greenville is very hot right now. And I think that is the time that we started seeing it here. We have limited. Visitor restrictions have been in place since March. Only staff and individuals that have a purpose to be on campus to provide a service are here. We do daily screenings of all of the staff and any visitors, taking temp checks, checking them for any symptoms. If anyone has anything that falls in that area that would make us suspicious, we provide further follow-up. We stopped all of the movement around campus and any crossovers with consumers. We have kept the consumers in their units or kept them cohorted with their housemates. We stopped movement off of campus even for medical trips, except for things that were essential at this time. We certainly have had PPE, we've had hand sanitizer, we have plenty of soap and water, we have masks, we have gowns, we have gloves, we have all of those things in place. We have provided training for the staff, and that's been ongoing. There have been many emails and memos and messages on TheraApp, our electronic communication system, to staff, and in-person training. Pat touched on the storing of the PPE and why we did that. That's been essential, but staff have received the PPE that they need for their area of work here on campus. Things have not been restricted. It's been given out as it's needed. And we have a process in place for that to occur. Let's see. Do you all have any questions for me, specifics?
Anyone from the commission have any questions for Randy?
I could also add too, we had BioPure, which is a sanitization service. They came in on July 1st and July 2nd. They went through all of our units and the workshop areas, and they provided a sanitization program. We also have ongoing, we have housekeeping here on staff. They are here each day to provide services. So we've taken many steps to eradicate the problem here at Whitten and to deal with the situation as it developed.
I don't really have any questions, but can we open it up to questions so those that have them can get this done? Because I think he's probably done as good a job as we can do under the circumstances, and in the interest of time, we just need to ask the questions that people have.
Absolutely. So yeah, I think that's appropriate, unless there was anything else from staff before we sort of open it up for general questions. Was there any other presentation that you guys were hoping to make?
And to add also, 6 of the units, we have 10 units right now where we have consumers living. 6 of those units have been cleared and are free of any consumers that are exhibiting symptoms. They have essentially recovered in those areas.
Okay.
I was wanting to ask you about the testing. I think I remember the start of COVID, you guys had gotten DHEC to send tests to a lot of the. Can you speak on the testing?
We had requested tests from DHEC. It had been a real hard. We got a few kits for PD when it first opened up, but not very many. We made a phone call to the new director of DHEC. He's an interim director at the moment. And did they deliver their 300 tests they promised? Yes, they did. Yes. So we do have tests. We've stationed them at all the centers, but just like anybody else, you don't want to constantly use them to retest negative. You use the symptom-free for a certain time period protocol to do that. There's 2 ways to tell someone's out of the woods of COVID, and that is this 15-day after no symptoms, no fever, which is actually what the hospitals are using. Because I asked that question about one of the individuals we have in the hospital who's still there 15 days post-COVID, and I asked, are you not doing a test to see if he's negative? And the doctor replied, no, we don't have supplies for that. We only have 5 days worth of supplies to tell if someone's positive We're just going to use this method to see if they're negatives on the other side of things. So, so if you're asking if we're just prophylactically testing, we're not. We're doing the, a symptom. We can do the swab, and we get, instead of sending someone to the emergency room, unless their oxygen stats go fast, we got to send them for that kind of reason. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is something that is an improvement for the next time. And it's I think Rufus was on the phone many days with DHEC to get them to give us test kits at the facility. Yeah. Because once you have test kits at the facility, you cut down that time, as well as you can speed up. If somebody becomes symptomatic in a unit, you could test that unit right away. So, but when it started, that was not available to us. It was only after fighting and clawing and getting the right amount of attention, but that is now at all the facilities. But I would say the turnaround time up in Lauren, from what, Randy, you correct me, if they got to the hospital, it was 2-day turnaround time, which is, I think, pretty good in today's world. And what we did see is some of the staff that went home to their own doctors, they got them tested, but those tests may not come back for 6-7 days because it's a different lab. So I think in the future, if we can do all our own testing, I think that will speed everything up in order to better quarantine people and isolate people quicker.
Other questions?
There was a comment in the email response to the WSB web article. I just wanted to clarify something in there.
Yes, ma'am.
On the second page of that, where you had talked about cross-contamination, you mentioned on the last sentence, cross-contamination by staff movement between buildings became less of an issue given the widespread infection in most all residents, coupled with reality of the lack of options due to depleted staffing out with illnesses. I just wanted to make sure you clarified that sentence. It was confusing to me. I don't know why, but I just was kind of hard.
Well, if you've got somebody in 205 that's positive, you're working in 205, and you're going to be asked to go to 204, which is positive, there's no fear of cross-contamination there from the staff moving forward. It was in reference to pulling staff from one building to another. Because I think that the point was made, I think, on the news that, they pulled staff and you cross-contaminated the building. So that's not the case. The one that was actually moved at that point was moved from a positive building to a positive building. So there was no issue of cross-contamination.
Okay.
But again, when you're only getting, there's some things we just couldn't talk about, but.
Okay, thank you.
Randy, you want to talk about it? Because it was heroic efforts to do the balancing. Randy, if you could comment, that'd be great. It would really illuminate.
Yeah. At the beginning of each shift, we assess the staff that are here. Of course, the scheduling is done in advance, but there are always some individuals who don't show up. There are always some call-ins. So at the beginning of each shift, we assess where the staff is, and we determine if we need to move any staff around in order to provide the appropriate coverage in each unit. We have always tried to make sure throughout this process that we weren't cross-contaminating, that we were moving staff if they were in a COVID positive building to another COVID positive building. But sometimes there are those times, depending on what the situation is, when that was not possible. But I do want to reiterate, in all of this, at this point, we had the PPE. Staff were trained on that. They had the appropriate PPE to be able to work in whichever area they were working in at the time.
Because you could, when you have personal protection, if I walk into a building, I don't need to know that somebody there has Hep C. I need to use proper techniques whenever I work with somebody. That's the whole idea behind universal precautions and you properly utilizing PPE in any situation in which you do close care. I believe now everybody also has face shields, right, Rufus? So we're not just using the mask. You're also putting a face shield over it in case for body fluids, something that is a little bit larger and would give somebody more security. So we're kind of doubling that barrier.
Randy, don't y'all have adequate face shields too?
Yes, sir, we do. And all staff have been issued face shields.
in all of our centers.
I mean,
Any additional questions or comments?
It looks like, is that Mr. Commissioner Miller, are you saying something? Mr.
Ed, you're muted on your end, Ed.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
Okay, Randy, just for our information, give me what happens during shift change as it relates to employees changing shifts. I just want a clarification on that. What happens? What procedures or guidelines do you follow, or you tell the employees as they come in? Just give me an idea.
As the employees come, each employee is assigned to a certain unit. That's their home unit. And they come in for their shift, and there's a 30-minute overlap between each shift. So first shift comes on at 6:45, third shift leaves at 7:15. So we have an overlap there for communication of what's going on and to assess the staffing needs. No one goes home until the FOD, which is the facility officer of the day. That's the person that goes around and just makes sure that the coverage is appropriate at the beginning of the shift. And we communicate through the switchboard with each shift, with each building, each shift. So we'll call Unit 102, determine how many staff are there for the oncoming shift, and call all of the other buildings. So we have an idea of what is campus-wide. And then we determine what we need to do if we need to shift any staff around. And that's how that process goes. Does that make sense?
Okay, imagine my question is, I as an employee, I'm coming on shift.
Mm-hmm.
How do you determine my health status, if that's appropriate?
Oh, he's talking about screening.
A screening
Yes.
A screening is done with each staff person when they come on. It is it's questions that we have taken from the CDC about have you been exposed to anyone who is COVID positive or being tested for COVID? Do you have any respiratory illnesses? Have you been to the ER lately? A variety of questions that you've probably answered or seen. And then there are also 8 or 9 symptoms that we question staff about.
You also take temperature.
Right, we take the temps, and they answer those questions. We take their temp, and if they have no issues, then they're cleared to work that shift. But if someone has a temperature of 101, or right now it's 100.4 for the cutoff, then that person is further checked out. We're not letting anyone work who has symptoms or who has a temp. Those individuals are sent home.
And if anybody feels like they don't feel well during a shift,
right,
all they need to do is report to their shift supervisor
right,
that there's a problem, and they will be sent home.
Correct.
But at that point, it becomes a self-report. We don't walk around and screen people all day long.
Right.
But they understand the world in which they live.
We do temp checks every 4 hours on a shift, so you're going to get a temp check.
I apologize, I forgot about the temperature
Twice.
checks. And we actually run that here too. I mean, when you come into the building, you're doing the screening, you're doing the temperature checks. We do that here. So that is a company-wide, for the whole agency, not just at the centers.
Okay, I just wanted to know simply because I'm a veteran, and I entered the VA one day, and they do all the checks that you just referenced, and I didn't see the gentleman behind me. He was in a wheelchair, but undoubtedly he knew the procedures. When I got upstairs to where my appointment was, he showed up. And one of the questions that they ask you to do is to cough. And that same gentleman that showed up upstairs, I don't know how he did it downstairs, but when he got upstairs, he was coughing, but I reported and they removed him out. So I imagine these are things that we are paying attention to.
Yes, sir.
And those screening procedures are in place not just at Witten, where the current outbreak is sort of peaked, but at all of our regional centers, correct?
Yes.
Other questions?
Commissioner Rollins, can you tell me about the current staffing levels? Are we fully staffed there, or all the staff back? Have we had to bring in temporary employees? What is the situation with that, if you don't mind me asking?
The staffing levels have greatly improved, as Pat mentioned earlier. Most individuals who have been out because they were positive are back. Our staffing levels on first shift are pretty much at full steam. Second and third shifts are still a little behind, but we're continuing to work on that. And I foresee that continuing to improve.
Very good, thank you.
I just elevated you to senator. Commissioner Rawlinson, I want to make sure that since you're new, staffing at the regional centers, direct care staffing is a nationwide problem. We've been discussing it for a couple of years. I'm looking at Commissioner Blackwood. She's been part of that whole discussion as how do we increase staffing levels at our regional centers, and Witten Center was one of the toughest. And they had gotten them pretty well stable, and then COVID hit. But we have been doing numerous things to try to increase staffing at our regional centers with those DSPs even before COVID hit. This is real issue.
Yeah.
And since Witten Center is kind of like not next to a big city or anything, there's not as much population there. Plus, they compete with the local boards, probably 3 different boards they compete with. So it's.
That's what I went to Presbyterian to college, so I'm very, very familiar with Witten Center. And my grandmother was an orphan at Thornwell, so that area is near and dear to my heart. And so I always want to check it. In my previous life, I worked in a federal grant program to certify nurse assistants. So that I understand that shortage. That's why I was asking.
And don't we have the best?
We still are, yes. Okay. We have just been swamped. So we have to get you guys a report as to where we are on that number. I would think at the next, we were waiting for a payroll period, and then we'll get you the exact numbers of that. But I think that we would even have more of a problem if we didn't have that. They just have to do that. Mm-hmm.
This is Commissioner Miller again. Is Walmart considered a hotspot?
No. It's just where a lot of people shop. And so it's a real good place to gauge mask usage.
Oh, okay. Are there any hotspots
in person? Yes, sir.
Are there any hotspots in that Witten area
Lawrence
that has been identified?
Yeah.
Primarily closest is Greenville, but of course.
Yeah, right now Greenville's warm.
Or East.
Or East, very,
Okay. The only reason why I'd ask that question, if there are identifiable hotspots, maybe one of the questions that we could ask the employees, did you visit this location? That's the only reason why I asked that question.
Yeah, no, we don't have like a location, and we were hearing reports that they had some street festivals going on that went on. They had some other large gatherings that were going on, but I just don't, it's a virus. You don't know where you got it. You don't know if you picked it, where you picked it up. And then you've got so many people walking around with no symptoms. And I'm not going to point my finger at them saying you should have known. They don't know, so it's basically you prepare, you train, you keep preparing, and you do the best you can. And then the best thing is that even given the level of vulnerability of our individuals and comorbidities that they have, that we are getting folks recovered at a very, very high rate. And that's the best thing. So, and the community, by the numbers, as far as picking a hotspot, the community's just popping up everywhere. It's pretty much cropping up at all locations.
And that actually is a question on the questionnaire that we use is do you live in a community where COVID-19 is spreading rapidly? So that is on there.
The reality is the entire state is spreading rapidly, and we just need to go from there. But moving on to other questions.
Any other questions? Comments? Anything of that nature? I would just say, just for information purposes for this commission, that Mary and I do speak multiple times a week, discussing any sort of peaks or anything of that nature. So she has been communicating significantly with me regarding the efforts that we've been making.
Then I try to gather the numbers together and send it out.
And just for reference, it's always, you know, the ultimate question that I always ask is, at the end of this, when somebody asks, well, why didn't you do X? We have to have an answer for that that's actually based in some sort of, you know, scientific basis. Well, we're doing quarantine in place versus moving everybody around. There has to be a basis for why we're doing that. So, you know, that's always, in my opinion, the number one requirement is we have to make decisions, but we have to be able to tell people at the end of a crisis why we made the decisions that we did, what we were basing that off of. And I think thus far, what we've been trying to do is maintain as best we can under DHEC guidelines, under CDC guidelines, and then take the extra steps even beyond that we need to. I mean, that's always,
Chairman,
what we want to do.
ask
Yes, sir.
one
Go ahead.
question.
Absolutely.
David here, can I ask a question?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
All right, give me the numbers one more time. So we've had a total system-wide, including consumers, including staff. What was the total infection thus far? How many?
Do you want them just from Witten Center, or do you want them for the state? Because we've been going through a lot of numbers.
The totality.
Rufus, do you want to answer that question?
Yeah, and keep in mind, these figures are as of 7/14, so the number is actually higher today. But as of 7/14, the total positive totaled 622, with 218 being individuals that we serve, and 404 were members of our workforce, and that's system-wide.
All right, the total again for, I didn't hear the first number, the grand total.
Grand total, 622.
622, and the number of deaths so far?
14.
14, okay.
Yes, sir.
But there are 4 in the regional centers. That's also staff you have in there, right, Rufus?
Yeah, the total.
Please break those numbers down for.
Yeah, I'll do it again. 14 total fatalities. In the community, that's 5 individuals that were supported by community residential providers pass away, and 4 staff. For the regional centers, we lost 4 consumers and 1 staff. And again, these figures were as of 7/14.
But we have no reports of death in the regional centers today.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Anything else? Okay. Randy, thank you for being here. Appreciate you answering all those questions for us as well.
Thank you.
Mary, moving on from the COVID side of things, was there anything else within the state director's report that you wanted to present?
No, sir. I did those first.
Okay, thank you. I am not aware, next on the agenda would be the executive session if needed. I'm not aware of any executive session matters to be had at this time. Does anyone else have anything that needs to be covered under executive session? Okay, seeing none, the next regular meeting date is August 20th. As I've communicated, we will be assessing as we get a little bit closer what our plan is as far as meeting in person or doing a remote meeting such as we've been doing, also in line with the training that we hope to be putting in place as well. So there'll be further updates with regard to that. That being said, if there's no other business to be brought before the commission at this time, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I heard Commissioner Miller first. We'll treat Commissioner Malphurs as a second in that situation. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. That motion carries. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, sir.
So have
Mark,
a good day.
Mark, you can go ahead and stop.
Take care, be safe, wear those